I am Christina Peterson from the Center for Educational Innovation, and I am happy to be here today to talk to you about teams, group work, student teams. This is a favorite topic of mine. And I appreciate those of you who are here today. It looks like it's a small group, so we can maybe make it more conversational as we keep going. So I just a couple of comments about participation. I will just say selfishly, I love to see your videos on because I like to see faces and interact and see if you're furrowing your brow or if you're smiling or nodding in agreement. Let me just say there's no judgment here about backgrounds or pets or if you're eating, right? We're all used to Zoom. And if you are not comfortable turning on your video, I absolutely understand that as well. So whatever you're comfortable doing, please do so. You'll be able to type questions into the chat at any time, and there will be a couple of prompts where I will ask for some responses from you as a group. And there are a couple of ways you can respond to that. You can either type in the chat, or you can unmute your microphone to speak, or if you prefer to have a spot be recognized to speak, that's how I like to attend Zoom meetings. You can just raise your hand and I can recognize you and call on you. So there's just different ways that you can participate. And I attended the presentation this morning from Michelle Benton that I really enjoyed. And I think one of the messages that kept coming out to me as I was watching, lots of good messages, was this idea of the importance of connection for us and for our students. And I think group work is a way to help foster that connection among students. And we heard from Michelle, and probably from our own experiences, we realized that students may be feeling lonely or disconnected. Group work is a way to help with that. And we'll talk about some strategies for making that work. So I thought that we'd start with an introductory activity where I'm just going to ask you to brainstorm from your experience teaching. What do you see are the advantages and the challenges that are related to having your students do group work in your course? And just take a minute to think about that. You can respond by either typing into the chat and maybe indicating whether whatever you're putting in there is an advantage or a challenge. It's interesting, sometimes the same thing can be both. Or if you prefer, you can unmute your microphone and speak directly to the group. So just take a minute to think about advantages and challenges, because we want to be realistic about this. So Lynn has typed in learning differences and strengths in each person on the team. Yes, so each person on that team, there are unique individuals. I teach management courses, so this is always important, learning how to work with others. So valuing the team itself, yes. And I think that if we set up a team project well, that can be part of the package. Learning how to work in a team and realizing that a team can perhaps do more than an individual can. Preparation for the real world of work in teams, absolutely. And this is one of the really authentic parts of teamwork projects or group projects, is that it is preparing students for the real world where most of us must work in teams in some form or another. Student resistance, yep, that is a real challenge. And we will be talking about student resistance and ways to overcome that. And I'm just going to tell you, full disclosure, I'm going to talk about all the great aspects of teams and groups, but I personally don't like working in them. So this is really going to be about selling this as a way that will help students and recognizing that some people just would prefer to do the work on their own. Our industry heavily uses teams to deliver projects, so it is a learning requirement, yes. And oftentimes in our jobs, we don't get to choose the people that we are working on teams with. And I will also say that employers, our AACU does sort of annual review of what employers are looking for in students, and ability to work in teams is always high on the list. An advantage is that group work is actually how almost all work is accomplished in professional life. They need to practice this. Yep, and they're practicing this in a safer environment than perhaps the real work world. Learning to work within a group in real life. Challenges include even participation by all team members. And this is something I hear a lot from faculty that I work with, and I have experienced myself. I do use group work in my own teaching. Is how do you get all students to participate, maybe prevent a particular student from dominating, or maybe prevent particular students from just sitting back and letting others control the process. So what you are putting in there are things that I have heard, and it is not surprising to me that in CCAPS, a lot of you are focusing on preparing for the work world, preparing for the real world. And I think perhaps your students would really understand this, perhaps more than other units or colleges. So thank you for that. And what I've done is put together a slide of benefits, and this is taken from the literature. So this is just a general summary of what the literature says are the advantages for students working in small groups as compared to having students work independently. They can achieve higher grades. They can learn at a deeper level while working in groups. They have the ability to retain information longer. There are studies that show even less likely to drop out of school because of interactions in groups. They acquire greater communication and teamwork skills. And as many of you have said, they gain a better understanding of the real work environment, the environment that professionals will work in. This and other advantages, and I do want to just mention again, it provides this contact and connection as well that may be particularly important at this time. However, these benefits are not automatic, and I think many of these benefits are predicated on setting up a good team project, managing it well, supporting students, and that is actually going to be the focus of what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to cover three broad areas. The first is that for all these benefits, it's important to create an appropriate team project for students. Next, I'm going to talk about providing students with skills for working in teams. And the last part of this presentation will be about assessing team projects effectively. How do we assess these projects? So I don't have a lot of time to talk to you today. There are a lot of categories I could talk about and details I could go into, but luckily I have a resource that I can share with you. And this is something that I have put together with my colleague, Mary Jetter at the center. And it is an online resource on our CEI website called the Faculty Guide to Team Projects. And it's all about helping faculty create, support, sustain, grade team projects. And there are a lot of resources on there and templates of forms, things that could be very effective for you. And we put this resource together by doing focus groups with undergraduate students, talking to our colleagues, talking to faculty. So here is the place to go if we don't have time to talk about it here, or if you want further information. And I'll probably mention it again in this presentation. So let's start from the beginning and talk about what is an appropriate project. So for students to be motivated and make the project worthwhile, I think it's really important to design an authentic task that requires both collaboration and distinct individual contributions. So what do I mean by an authentic task? An authentic task would be something that a professional in your field might do. An authentic task is related to your discipline and related to your course content and material, in that it is actually something a practicing person in your field might do. So authentic tasks often motivate students. And then the idea of collaboration is that the project should benefit from collaboration. So that means coming up with a problem or challenge or a project idea that's complex enough to benefit from multiple perspectives. And so what I often ask myself when I am putting together a team project is, could this team project be effectively completed by somebody on their own? And if the answer to that question is yes, it's probably not an effective team project. Because what students will say is, why do I have to work in a group on this? This is something I could more easily do by myself, and I don't have to meet with other people. So I think it is really important that the project you create requires that group work in order to complete it. So what I'm going to talk about next, I'm just going to give you 3 brief examples of some projects that meet the criteria I'm talking about. And these are projects that are currently being used by faculty here at the University of Minnesota, and they have had success with them. Some of the ideas here may not resonate with you and your discipline. So, take what makes sense for you, or think of ways that you might be able to adapt these. So the first project that I want to talk about is an introductory biology course team project. And in fact, this project was written up in Science, the journal Science, as a successful way to get students thinking like a scientist. And basically, here's how it works. Teams of 9 in this intro biology class choose a societal problem of interest. So they get to pick something that they're interested in, which helps with motivation. And then basically they have to come up with a genetic solution to the problem. So for instance, some of the topics have been, how do we create peanuts that don't cause allergies in humans? How do we come up with a vaccine to prevent people from smoking? Those kinds of things. And they pretty much have the whole semester to work on the project. And at the end of the semester, they present their solutions in the form of a poster session. And there is a picture of one of the poster sessions that's on this slide. And throughout the semester, all the different areas that they work on in biology are tied to this team project, so that they are incorporating what they learn as they move along in this team project. So that's one example. Another is in an international business management course. And this team project is asking the students in the course to create and deliver mock training for doing business in a particular country. So the ultimate thing that students will produce is this professional development training that they give to their classmates. They're in teams of 4 or 5, and they get to choose a country of interest, and they research all sorts of important information about that country regarding cultural considerations and things that they need to know in order for doing business in that country. And that's an ongoing part of the class. And then towards the end of the semester, the teams present their findings in sessions to their peers. And what's nice about this is then everybody gets to learn from the other group's research on their particular countries. And finally, I'd like to talk about a web usability project. And this is part of a writing studies course on web usability, where student teams are asked to work with a community partner. And the instructor actually helps set up the potential partners they can work with. But partners, perhaps in nonprofit or government organizations that normally wouldn't be able to, didn't have the resources to engage in usability services. And then the students work with those groups to collect data, assess their website, make recommendations for their website, and then actually present their recommendations to the organization. And they are graded on that and a written report that individually students make about that experience. So I have gone through briefly some projects that I think represent pretty good examples of projects for teams to work on that are complex, require the group to participate in that. So I'd just like to turn this over to you to hear what are group projects that you're using, team projects that you're using, that are authentic and benefit from the work of others. It doesn't necessarily have to be a project in your course. It could be a project you have participated in, or a colleague has used, or you have heard about. But what kinds of things are you doing for team projects? And again, you can put this into the chat. You can unmute your microphone and talk and let us know about it. You can raise your hand and I will recognize you and you can share that with us. So Peter Hilger has an industry-sponsored competition event for a built project and an intercollegiate competition level. So this is really exciting because that competition part really adds to the motivation, and I think might enhance the teamwork and how students work together. And I'm sure they take pride in the project that they are creating, and they have this great end product that they can show to potential employers and to friends and family. So I think competitions can be added some fun and motivation. What else are you doing or have you seen other people doing? So John here has added teams of 4 must complete 4 IT security policies and write an overview document of them jointly, then create a recorded presentation on them. And so what's nice about this particular project is that they're doing more than one thing in terms of disseminating what they've learned or information that they've gathered. They're writing a document, and presumably that is to standards that are appropriate for the field. And they're also giving a presentation. So 2 skills that are important in the work world that they're looking at. Presentation is then peer reviewed. Oh, interesting. So now students are involved in reviewing each other's presentations, which ups the motivation for students to pay attention and participate in that. Jeff says our course, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Jeff or Joff, our course teams create business plans for real work settings, work with these healthcare organizations, do research and present the final plans to the class and to the organization. So that's somewhat like the web usability project I designed before. Many plans have been implemented over the past years, and some students actually have been hired by these organizations. So there's a lot of great stuff going on there with those projects. And the fact that the plans, I mean, you can't get more authentic than that, right? It is for a real organization. And the fact that some of these plans are implemented has to be highly motivating to students when they learn about this project, and that it can lead to employment opportunities is also amazing. That would certainly make me motivated. Okay, and Lynn has said, teams of 4 throughout the semester take what we have learned in class and apply by visiting an organization and interviewing appropriate parties to learn organizational governance, culture, rituals, HR challenges, a wide variety, then provide a 30 to 45-minute presentation. That's peer review again. So that's getting everyone else involved in class, as well as for a grade by faculty. And Peter adds a team project with different CCAPS disciplines during our study abroad. Wow, that's super cool. That solves a problem for a local Costa Rican agency of need in local language, currency, and metric system. Our proposal was ultimately built. That is so cool. You know, I shouldn't be surprised by all these fabulous, authentic team projects that CCAPS faculty are bringing forward, because you are grounded in the real world, perhaps more than other areas, other places in the university. So I thank you for those examples. These are amazing. And I think these illustrate very well projects that require the input of a team and would be very, very difficult for an individual student to do on their own. So I'm going to keep going.
Christine, could I ask a question?
Of course, yes.
I find it easier to ask than to type things out.
I understand, yes.
And I couldn't figure out where I raised my hand. So I'm obviously challenged.
Oh,
it's nice to meet you. I am taking this to improve my case study assignments. At what point is it too much? I see all these great things that everyone's doing. And I have 2 case studies that I use in place of a midterm and a final exam. I teach managerial accounting. One of them is a group, one's not. I was thinking about adding the presentation piece to mine, which they don't currently do. I'm just curious as to what point I'd like to see this almost in context when people are saying that they're doing these. Is it the entire semester they're working on them? Is it one case study and then they go on to another? I'm trying to get an idea as to the volume of the assignment. Maybe I need some coffee. Does that make sense?
Meaning like the workload, how much students have to do?
Yes.
Well, I will say, and others can chime in about their particular projects as well in the chat, or if you want to talk. The projects I was illustrating were mostly semester-long projects.
Okay.
So projects that are complex like that probably do take a semester or a good chunk of the semester for students to really dig into it. And also they're learning the skills and the content as they go along to be able to do these. So it does take time. And it also, as we'll talk about, it takes time for teams to begin functioning well together. Let's see.
This is very helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So I'm moving along to talking about the next step, which is providing skills for students to work in teams. Sometimes faculty will assume, oh, they're adults. By the time they get to my class, they should already know how to work in teams. And my response to that is, surprisingly, they probably don't know. And if you think all adults know how to work in teams, you should come to some of our staff meetings or attend staff meetings that I've been to. I think everybody could perhaps use some updates on teamwork skills. So I think if we're going to ask our students to work in teams and we're going to grade the output of their team, that it is somewhat incumbent on us to also provide them with instruction on teamwork skills, helping them learn how to work better in teams. So one possibility is to share with students just some basic knowledge about how teams function. This happens to be the Tuckman model of team dynamics. There are other models out there that talk about how teams come to work together, become more efficient. But the whole idea of presenting something like this is that the message you want to send to students is that conflict in teams is normal. It is not something to be avoided. It is something that can lead to more creative and better decisions. It's something to be managed. But if your team is having conflict, it is not necessarily a sign that the team is not functioning well. And so just really briefly, this Tuckman model says that most teams go through 4 predictable stages: forming, when they first come together, where everybody's polite and they are, trying not to step on anybody's toes. And what this graph here shows on the x-axis is the performance of teams over time, and then their effectiveness. So they may start out in this forming stage. Then they progress to a storming stage where the conflict begins to come out. And there may be challenges, maybe some fighting, some vying for dominance within the group. And because of all of this conflict, the performance of the team goes down. But it's normal, and it is a normal part of the process. And well-functioning teams will come out of this phase into what is called a norming phase, where they start to develop their rules and processes and understand each other better and move to being more effective in their functioning. And then performing, where the team is really working together and being able to turn out good work. And so just even talking about this, that conflict is a normal part, and learning how to turn this into an effective team process is something that's important to do. All right. So one way that instructors do this, and I actually do this in my own teaching, is have students devise a policy statement. And a policy statement would be some type of agreement of how we as a team are going to work together. And ideally, this policy statement would be created before the team starts to do any actual work. It's a great opportunity for them to talk about their expectations of each other. And it's also an opportunity for them to talk about their bad experiences and what they are hoping their group will do. So the website that I told you about, the Faculty Guide to Team Projects, has some examples of policy statements there if you want to check them out. The one that is shown here is one that I used in my Pharmacology of the Synapse course. And it basically asks the students to spend, I think they were spending 5 or 10 minutes in a group discussing things like, how will we make decisions? Will it be majority rule? Will it be unanimous? How important is it to show up on time? Do we want to have one leader facilitator, or do we want to distribute that between the group? And it gets them talking about it before the conflict occurs. So they're all calm and able to talk about it rationally, and then have all the students agree. I actually have each student sign that they agree to this policy statement for their group. And it's something they can refer back to if a conflict comes up in the future. For instance, if somebody is not doing their work, they can go back to this and say, we all agreed that we would do the work we're responsible for, or if something came up, we would email the group and say, can somebody help me finish this, etc. So I think the conversation that they have around this is really the critical part, and that this document is a way to get that conversation going. And I am seeing here that people are talking about, they also have teams fill out team charters, a team contract. I think this saves a lot of pain, perhaps, in the future by having them talk about it before those challenges come up. Another thing that many faculty use, and also this is something I use as well, is asking students, advising them to assign roles to the different members of their teams. And the roles that you suggest would depend on the nature of the team project that you're using. So for instance, you could have one student acts as a facilitator, one student acts as a recorder, one student acts as the presenter. And this just helps have students specialize in different areas. So those expectations are out there. They're not spending a whole lot of time saying, who wants to report this out? Did anybody take notes, right? It helps with that. And the nice thing about having these roles assigned is that you can also consider having students rotate the roles so that they get to experience more than one role within a group. For instance, the same person isn't the recorder every time, or the same person isn't the facilitator. It helps students experience those roles. Sometimes students are resistant to the idea of having to take on roles in groups. So it really would depend on how important you think it is, the amount of energy you would put into enforcing this. But you can always say things like, you'll have 10 minutes today during our session to work in teams. I recommend that you appoint somebody to be the recorder to fill out these forms so that that is done right away. So roles are something that you might want to consider. The other thing that I would recommend is to have the teams assess themselves, assess how their team is doing. And the website that I told you about, Faculty Guide to Teamwork, has an example of a form you might consider using. You could modify it or create your own form. But basically, maybe early on in the process where they've had a chance to work with each other for a while, have them all each take this, fill out this form individually, and their questions like, here's our behavior. Do we all arrive on time? Are we all prepared, etc. Then have them discuss their responses as a team and maybe come up with, here's one thing we're doing really well. Here's one thing we need to work on. And when I use teams in my classes, I actually assign points for this, a very small number of points, and it's just for completing it. But it's a way to show that I think this is worth your time to work on and there's some motivation to do it. So that may be something else you want to consider. So before I move on to the last part, which is assessing your team, I'll just check the chat to see if there are any questions or if anybody wants to unmute themselves. They can comment or add a question. I see Stacy has a comment. What do you do with the results from the interim assessment? Do you get involved? I'll just tell you my approach. Ideally, I think the teams themselves should be doing this on their own. Mm-hmm. So my involvement is basically providing class time for them to actually do it and then giving them points for doing it. When I was face to face, I could always walk around the room and check in with groups. You can do that in breakout rooms on Zoom as well to see how it's going. And then maybe deciding in your own mind how much you want to get involved with team politics. So that is something you can make clear at the very beginning of, here's what I want you to do. First, I want you to try and work it out as a group. Next, if you have trouble, send me an email, and I might give you some advice. And if nothing works, then maybe we can all work together. I know that Michelle Dreesen, who's a chemistry instructor who uses Teams in her teaching, and she has huge classes, allows students to fire a team member. And it's a very regimented process. First, they have to meet with the team member, show them what they have to do to improve. Then the final step is they meet with her, and she says by the time they get to that final step, it very rarely actually gets to her. So just consider how much you want to get involved and let students know that ahead of time. Okay, so I will say of all of the topics related to teamwork, this is the one I hear about the most from faculty. These are the questions that seem to be most on the mind of faculty that we work with. And we know from the hits to our web resource, this is the top one. So many people ask, how do I assess team projects? And the quick answer is that I think it's important to assess both the team output and individual performance. The individual performance assessment is important so that you don't have a situation, as shown in the cartoon here, where students feel like, well, it's not going to affect me if I don't participate in this team project. And what I'm going to show you next is basically a table that we've put together that is simply a menu of options and different ways that you can assess the teams, different ways that you can assess individuals. And so the big picture of what I'm suggesting is pick one from each column. So have something that is a team responsibility that they get graded for, and individual responsibilities. So a team grade for the finished project is an example of team assessment. Collaborative exams are something you might want to consider, or two-stage exams where students take exams as individuals, then they take exams as a group, and they get some combination of the score. Same with team quizzes. Those are ways where the team is responsible for the output of everybody. And then individual assessments can include individual writing assignments. So they may make a presentation or they may put together a group report, but in addition, they also have to do some individual assignment to show that they also understand what's going on. Peer review of teammates. So this is where students actually give their teammates a score on predetermined criteria of how well they contributed to the team. And of course, there's always individual exams and individual quizzes that check for student learning and understanding. So one thing I would say about peer review, and this is again where students are evaluating each other on particular skills in their project, is to consider the percentage that evaluation will carry in a final grade. So this is just a draft of one way that you could look at the impact of that peer review on a final grade. So for the project final grade, perhaps 90% of that grade is the team score, whatever they all got together. And then their peer review of each other could account for 10% of that. And this is the part where you would, this I have to say is kind of a, there's no magic number here, trial and error of what that percentage is of the peer review. Some instructors actually poll their students at the beginning of the semester and ask them what they think is fair. And I think here, I'm just referring you back to that Faculty Guide to Teamwork site. On this page that talks about individual contributions to the team, if you scroll down, there are 4 different examples of peer review forms that you might want to consider using for your students when they peer review each other. And finally, if you are going to ask students to peer review each other and there's some consequence in the term in term of points, I think it's really important to have them do a practice peer review. A formative peer review by the same standards that will be used at the end of the project, but this doesn't affect their grade. So then they can look at these results. If there's any problems going on from their team members, they would have the opportunity to fix it. And then the very last thing I want to say is these teamwork projects are always a work in progress. And so it's hard to get, in fact, probably impossible. You'll never get to a point where, yep, this is exactly how I want this team project to be, because your students are different each semester. So collect feedback. Ask students, how do they think the project went? And reflect on that feedback and make whatever changes you think might be useful going forward. So, in summary, and I know I've talked a lot about a lot of information in a short amount of time, begin with a project that is an authentic task that requires both collaboration and distinct individual contributions. Help your students by providing them with skills for how to work in teams, and assess both team output and individual output and individual performance. So these are some of the resources that I have used, and the slides, the links to all of these things are in the slides that are on the Canvas site. And with 1 minute left, I will turn it over to see what questions you have. And we have an evaluation form. There's a link to the evaluation form that was put in the chat. Please fill that out. This presentation has actually been shaped by feedback from these presentations, from these evaluation forms. So I appreciate so much your participation, hearing about your great team projects, listening to this presentation, and if in the interest of time,
hey, Christina,
you have to go. Yeah.
I was in a presentation once about 3 years ago, and they said that I could send maybe 2 years ago, I could send my not the syllabus, the grading rubric to a certain department. They go through and they help me to see if it was substantial and, if it really was hitting the points that I wanted to make. Does that ring a bell to you? Because I've been trying to remember who that was.
Yep. So there's 2 places you can go for that. One is the Center for Writing, and they are fabulous with giving you rubric advice. I highly recommend them. Okay. You can also go to us as well at the Center for Educational Innovation. And don't forget CEI if you want a consultation. All of that is free, and we are happy to work with you as often or just one time, whatever works for you.